Labis-labis na talaga ang init na nararamdaman natin sa ngayon. Hindi na ito ordinaryo, kagaya noong unang panahon. Kapag tag-init ay matinding tagtuyot ang dinaranas natin. Kapag naman tag-ulan ay matitinding bagyo at baha ang banta sa atin. Dahil ito sa tinatawag nilang climate change o pag-init ng mundo na kung hindi mapipigilan ay magdudulot ng dilubyo sa mga tao. Ang pag-init ng mundo ay dala ng matinding polusyon na gawa rin ng mga tao. Ang polusyon na ito ay ang mga greenhouse gases na siyang pumipigil upang hindi na makalabas pa ng ating atmosfera ang sobrang init na hindi na kailangan ng mundo natin. May magagawa pa ba ang mga tao upang pigilin ito? Opo, meron pa kung magtutulungan tayong lahat. Sa Paris, France ay nagtulungan na ang napakaraming mga bansa upang umaksyon sa lumalalang problemang ito sa climate change. Ang mga ito ay nagtutulungan ngayon upang pababain mula sa 2.0 degrees Celsius sa 1.5 degrees Celsius ang dapat sana ay madadagdag na init ng mundo pagsapit ng taong 2050. Tinawag nila itong Paris Agreement. Dito sa Pilipinas, hindi pa man kumikilos ang ating gobyerno. Sinimula na ng mga pribadong kumpanya ang inisyatibo upang buuin ang Net Zero Carbon Alliance. Isa itong multi-sectoral group upang magtulong-tulong na babawasan ang ibinubugang carbon dioxide sa hangin natin. Binubuo ito ng mga kumpanya sa pangunguna ng Energy Development Corporation. Isa sa mga kilalang kumpanya ng mga renewable sources of energy sa bansa, Unilever Philippines, Cemex Philippines, Montanisan Corporation at marami pang iba. At upang mas mapalakas pa ang advokasya, inimbitahan din ng mga kompaniyang ito ang mga media practitioners sa iba-ibang panig ng bansa, lalong-lalo na ang mga tagagawa ng mga balita tungkol sa kalikasan. Sila ay isinailalim sa isang araw na media training and workshop na kung tawagin ay Net Zero 101. Ayon kay Attorney Alan Barcena, ang Head of Corporate Support ng Energy Development Corporation at siya rin kasalukuyang Net Zero Carbon Alliance Executive Director. Napakahalaga ng papel ng media sa pagpapaabot ng impormasyon sa tao ukol sa napakahalagang mission na ito.
Because we'd like our media partners to be more engaged in terms of the net zero or climate change discourse. No? And we know that with your power, to inform and to influence. You're a big part of the solution, actually. So this is not, climate change is really, as mentioned by Ping, and as she will mention later, climate change is an existential threat. No? It's really serious, and I think the science is overwhelming. It's real, and we are actually feeling the effect and the impact climate change.
Karamihan sa mga dumalong media practitioners ay mga veterano na at napakarami ng karanasan sa pagbabalita ng mga trahedya, dulot ng kalamidad na nangyari sa nakalipas na mga panahon na hindi natin namamalayan ay epekto pala ng climate change.
Even without typhoons, no, we get a lot of floods in Catanduanes and many parts of Bicol region. So, yun, before, parang in early 2000s, we don't experience those things eh. So ngayon, grabe na talaga.
Nung nakita ko na yung worst impact ng climate change is sa water talaga. Kahit typhoons, ang na-hit talaga yung water lagi. So yun, ang worst na effect ng climate change sa community.
Good morning, I'm from Leyte. I'm from Ormo. You know what happened there? 11 years ago, November. After the flash flood that killed more than 3,000, there was Yolanda and there was an earthquake.
Sabi nga ng host ng workshop na si Ms. Ping Munongdo, Country Director Philippines and Assistant Director, Partnerships of Eco-Business, hindi lang naman tagtuyot, bagyo, baha, ang dapat nating katakutan sa climate change, kundi marami pang ibang mga panganib sa sangkatauhan.
Even with a 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, the world faces severe climate impacts such as greater incidence of ice-free summers in the Arctic Ocean, twice as much loss of plant and insect species, and almost a complete devastation of coral reefs. In the sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa and Southeast Asia could face more than 30 days of deadly heat each year, and we will experience greater frequencies of floods, droughts, water scarcity, but also all in greater intensity.
Ano nga ba talaga ang net zero? At ano nga ba ang magagawa nito upang kahit papano ay mabawasan ang matinding epekto ng pag-iinit ng mundo sa mga darating pang mga panahon?
What is net zero? We release 55 gigatons of greenhouse gases into the air every year. To stop global warming, we have to get our greenhouse gas emissions down to zero. But for every country to immediately shut down all greenhouse gas releasing activities would be an enormous challenge, especially since some countries have built up an economic head start with no restrictions. So instead, we can use an approach called net zero. Net zero means that for every molecule of greenhouse gas we put into the air, we also take one out, making our net emissions zero.
The first step to take on our climb to minimal impact, carbon neutral. To be carbon neutral, the amount of greenhouse gas released is matched by reductions elsewhere. This is emissions offsetting through carbon credits. Buying credits helps fund carbon avoidance projects around the world, like renewable energy generation or forest protection. For example, say a company emits 1,000 tons of carbon in a year through its activities and value chain. It then buys credits to save 1,000 tons of carbon from being released elsewhere. Emissions are compensated for, and the company is carbon neutral. It will need to go a step further and aim for net zero emissions. An international target of net zero emissions by 2050 was agreed at the Paris Climate Summit. Meeting this target will help limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius this century. Net zero is also about neutralizing emissions, but it starts with attempts to cut how much carbon ends up in the atmosphere in the first place. So a company, or country, or individual works out its total emissions and puts these on one side of the scale. Activities like manufacturing, transportation, and buildings all add up. Then, less obvious indirect emissions are factored in. These might include emissions released by a supplier when they make a product's component, or for the international conference example, the food miles of the catering. Next, in line with laws and targets, emissions are reduced, ideally 45% by 2030. In our example, the first step might be that the office and factory are renovated to high efficiency standards and energy now comes from renewable sources. Then, the manufacturing process is streamlined. Perhaps the supplier makes their own emissions reductions. Finally, the fleet of vehicles becomes electric. It's hard to completely avoid emissions, so instead, any greenhouse gases that are still released are neutralized by investment in carbon removal projects. This is where carbon is taken out of the atmosphere and locked away, either naturally or using technology. Emissions can now be called net zero.
Kaya pa naman palang pababain ang carbon emission at bawasan ang dami ng greenhouse gases na siyang nagpipigil ng sobra-sobrang init upang lumabas ito ng atmosfera natin. Pangunahing sangkap kasi ng greenhouse gases ang carbon dioxide at ito rin ang kayang-kaya pa nating tanggalin kaya dapat talagang pagtuunan ng pansin. Magagawa ito sa pamamagitan ng pinagkaisang aksyon lahat ng mga tao. Kung hindi kayang pigilin na magbuga ng carbon dioxide sa hangin, at least kailangan magtanim tayo ng napakaraming mga puno na siyang hihigop sa mga mapanganib na gas na ito. Kailangan ding suportahan ang mga kumpanyang gumagamit ng mga renewable resources, kagaya ng Energy Development Corporation at mga may programang pangkalikasan. Sama-sama din nating kalampagin ang gobyerno na bigyang prioridad ang net zero advocacy. Sana'y lumawak pa ang kalaman natin sa pangangalaga ng ating kalikasan at paglaban sa climate change. Hindi na biro ang mga nangyayari at kailangan na nating kumilos. Malalaking negosyo man o maliit, mayaman man o mahirap, lahat tayo ay may papel na gagampanan sa pagsalba ng ating planeta. Kumilos na bago pa maging huli ang lahat. Yan ang istorya ni Rabasero ngayon. Maraming salamat sa inyong panonood. Hanggang sa muli!